Another thing I've been very much contemplating since the first day of our seminar is forms of attention and how we're trained to give attention to certain things. And one of the great questions that Alan Jacobs asked at one point was, how can we intentionally structure our lives so that those things that are most worthy of our attention are in fact the things most proximate to us? Those are the things actually nearest to us, so that we don't have to go searching far and wide to give attention to the right things, but actually we give attention to the things nearest to us because those are the things most worthy of attention. And this question of attention, technopoly, catechesis that our culture does to us, so that we're actually trained to give attention actually to what our culture tells us to give attention to. Like, here's what you ought to spend your money on. And here's how you become the kind of a person who will spend your money in the ways that the broader culture wants you to. That there are really these deeply informed sort of motivations behind practices of social media and everything else to inculcate these sort of consumerist habits, and how contrary some of those consumerist habits are to what we actually as Christians want to do in the world, what we want to do with the world, in the ways that we want to engage it. So that question about what we give attention to and how we give attention to the right things, and then relatedly to then those other opposing concepts of like Christian vision of the world, and then sort of this technopoly, and also then the consumerist vision of the world. I think those intersect in interesting ways.
I also thought it was interesting when we were talking about when Josh brought up the idea of like, whose job is it, right, to really educate, should this be the job of the church or the family, and the history of what happened, how education came to be, right, and in terms of the university or the Christian school being kind of like a missional like way of kind of partnering with the church, and how important it is in terms of us, in that Christian mission, right, to actually like be mentoring students because of the forces of the world, right, because of the fact that this time that we have them is so critical in terms of how they are forming their identity, right, in terms of how they're seeing themselves and how their lives are going to play out in the world. How much of this is our job, really? Like, shouldn't this be the job of the church, or shouldn't this be the job of... But the reality is those forces are so strong. And I thought it was really interesting to hear, historically, how did this come to be that we have so much responsibility for, mentoring students, and how did this become the Christian mission? Is this the right institution?
Yeah, I thought that was also very insightful and provocative. It's making me rethink, well, I've been in the process of trying to think about how do my wife and I raise 4 kids. So we've got 10-year-old, 9-year-old, 6-year-old, and 4-year-olds. And we're thinking about their education. Right. And that discussion and the strength of that consumerist catechesis, but the history of education, like you're saying, actually coming alongside the church to help form human persons, that definitely is making me think again about the role of education, and also the role of Christian education, and how important that actually is. So in one sense, that discussion said, at the end of it, I was like, man, I'm so glad to be teaching at Biola. Right. What an exciting place to be where we can do that work. But what a huge task it is to try to offer a different catechesis than the one that a lot of our students have already sort of swallowed accidentally.
Right.
And then how do I also provide for my kids a counter catechesis so that they don't just accidentally absorb the one that the culture is establishing?
I had the opportunity to kind of have been in both camps, right? So have had my oldest daughter in public school, and then be working in the public school, and then be seeing what are the influences of that on the formation of the students, and to have worked in like that institutional setting, and now be in a Christian institutional setting, and then see my other children go through a Christian high school and then be at Biola. And so I have two things of comparison, right? So in terms of being able to see more value in, not just as somebody who's the mentor, right, with someone else's children, but to also see how significant that is and has been and can be with my own children. I never told my kids that they had to come to Biola, because I feel like if you say this is your only choice, then
it's less likely to happen.
Yeah, but what I did say to my children, because I worked full time and went to school full time, part time for years, so my situation's a little different from most of the professors here. By the time I got my PhD, I told my kids, "You're calling me Dr. Mom." So for them, I said, I worked really hard, really long to be able to give you this benefit that a lot of students have to pay a lot of money for, right? And if you want to go someplace else, then you have to figure out how to do it, right? Because this is something that's, but thankfully, my son, who was like the most antagonistic, well, I'm never going to go to Biola, I told him I think it was a couple of weeks ago, I said, hey, because he's in 9th grade now. I was like, next summer we're going to go looking for colleges. We're going to do the road trip and we're going to go look at places. And he's like, Mom, why? I'm just going to go to Biola. And I said, well, you want to keep your options open. We'll look at things. It'll be fun. We'll get to go on a road trip together. And, when I was listening to our conversation this afternoon, I was thinking, this is a blessing in disguise that he's kind of like, because I feel like this is such a great place for them to be when they have those questions and they have to make those decisions, right?
Yeah. And the role that came out, that role of having teachers who are actually for them, for their formation, for their Christian formation, rather than either just negligent of it or against it, that they're actually, which, and then you might have some who are for it, but here, like a consistent environment of professors who actually want the best for the students.
Right.
And who then can model Christian character and Christian living and Christian practice of their discipline and all of these things. I do think that, that's something I'm excited about too, hoping my kids will someday come here as well.
I mean, you're a theologian, so Alan asked us today, how do you do your discipline, the faith and learning, right? Do you think about what that looks like outside of theology in terms of what are the students experiencing in other areas?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. So I have thought quite a bit about it. The integration of theology with philosophy that's obviously sort of the nearest conversation partner to theology, but then also to things like literature or the social sciences, because we're talking about people and their relationship with God. And so it's not like this is just an abstract discipline, but it actually has to take into consideration other things we know about human people, and we have common interests in identity. Mm-hmm. So this idea of like, God has given us a certain identity as his image and in relationship with him, and a covenantal identity, but then we have a range of other identities, our ethnicity, our race, our national background, and then more even local identities. So I grew up in rural Illinois and rural Nebraska, and that forms me in a certain way, but obviously that's different than someone growing up in the LA area or whatever. But then personal identities too, how even within those social dynamics, each of us has our own personal way of imagining, who we are and living in the world. So how did those, I'm very interested moving forward actually in that relationship between those two. What is these created identities that God has set in place, and they're fixed for all of us as humans, but then we have all of these sort of individual identities and social identities. How do those relate to each other? And I think that that's a deep area of integration.
Right, and I also think, what does the world tell us about our identities, right? And and what does God tell us about those identities? That's also really important. I know one of the things with my heritage learners is they grow up in this society that doesn't value being bilingual or doesn't value cultures other than kind of being American. And so they feel like they have to choose or compromise or to assimilate to become And so one of the things in my class that we talk about is, our created identity and also God's value for language and God's value for diversity, as a way to kind of have them think about, like, how has God created me to be bilingual, right? To have this experience of being bilingual and to have this cultural experience, and then how can I use the way God created me to bless others, right?